You could feel it the moment she walked in. The courtroom air changed, heavy, still, almost sacred. Judge Caprio looked up from his worn-out papers, his pen pausing midair, as if time itself had taken a deep breath. He'd seen thousands of faces over the years. Faces lined with guilt, worry, shame, even defiance. But that morning was different. The bailiff called the next case, and a quiet hush fell over the room. Case of Isabella Montero Ashford, the bailiff announced. The name itself carried weight. Elegant, foreign, the kind of name that makes you picture marble floors and long hallways echoing with privilege. Judge Caprio's eyes softened, curious. Unpaid parking tickets, $427. Simple enough. But nothing about this case felt simple. As Isabella stepped forward, you could almost hear the faint click of her designer heels against the old tile floor. She was young, 24, maybe 25, and dressed in quiet perfection. A silk scarf draped around her neck, diamonds catching the harsh courtroom light. But beneath all that grace, something trembled. Her hands. Even from the bench, Caprio noticed them shaking, not from fear of a fine, but from something deeper, something she didn't want anyone to see. Her eyes, red-rimmed, tired, betrayed what her flawless appearance tried to hide. She had been crying not long ago. Behind her stood a tall man in an expensive suit, her attorney. His leather briefcase looked like it could pay someone's rent for a year. He carried himself with that polished confidence money buys, ready to make this small-town case disappear in a flurry of legal jargon. But Judge Caprio, he didn't care about brands or briefcases or names that opened doors. He cared about stories. He leaned back slightly, watching this young woman who looked so perfectly composed on the outside and so broken on the inside. He'd been on that bench for decades, long enough to know when something didn't add up. And something about Isabella Montero Ashford didn't add up. "Good morning," he said gently. "Please step forward." His tone wasn't stern, it was human. Isabella nodded politely, walking up to the bench. The faint scent of expensive perfume reached him, but beneath it, he sensed something else. The salt of tears. Before her lawyer could even open his mouth, Judge Caprio lifted a hand. "Before we get into the legal part," he said, "I'd like to ask you something. How are you doing today?" The question hung in the air like a soft note in a silent room. Isabella blinked, clearly taken off guard. No one ever asked that in a courtroom. Certainly not a judge. For a moment, her mask slipped. Her chin trembled. The proud, elegant daughter of an ambassador suddenly looked like a lost child trying to stay strong. And in that small, fragile silence, something shifted. This wasn't just another case. This was a story waiting to be heard. Her lawyer, clearly unsettled, stepped forward. "Your Honor, if I may," he began confidently. "My client is prepared to present a formal motion to dismiss these charges under grounds of diplomatic immunity." The words dropped like cold metal onto warm air. Judge Caprio blinked slowly. Diplomatic immunity? The room stirred. People exchanged quiet glances. A few even smiled. Diplomatic immunity for parking tickets? In Providence Municipal Court? That was a first. He looked at the lawyer. "That's an interesting defense, counselor. Perhaps you can help me understand exactly what you mean." The attorney straightened his tie, a little too quickly. "Your Honor, my client's father is Ambassador Eduardo Montero, currently serving as the Brazilian ambassador to the United Nations. Under the Vienna Convention, his immediate family members are entitled to immunity from local jurisdiction." Caprio nodded slowly. The puzzle pieces fell into place. The clothes, the poise, the confidence. An ambassador's daughter. But what he saw standing before him wasn't a diplomat's child. It was a frightened young woman with shaking hands and tired eyes. And deep down, he already knew this wasn't going to be about parking tickets at all. He placed his glasses down on the desk. "I appreciate that explanation, counselor," he said quietly. "But before we go down that road, I'd like to hear from your client directly." The lawyer hesitated. "Your Honor, But Isabella lifted her hand. Just a small, graceful gesture. It silenced him instantly. She turned to face the judge, her eyes steady but heavy with something unspoken. Your Honor, she began, her accent soft, each word chosen carefully. My attorney advised me to claim diplomatic immunity. He said it would make all of this go away. She paused. For a long second, she seemed to be gathering strength from somewhere deep within. But I'm tired of things just going away. The words hit the room like a whisper of truth. Even the air seemed to listen. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly. Tired of pretending? He asked. Her voice softened. Yes. She looked down at her trembling hands, then back up, and for the first time her eyes didn't hide. I'm tired of pretending. The courtroom was still. Every heartbeat seemed louder. Behind her, the attorney looked uneasy. The gallery had fallen silent. Even the shuffling of papers stopped. And though no one knew it yet, this young woman's story was about to shake everyone in that room. But then something happened that no one expected. Because what started as a simple parking ticket case was about to uncover a truth that would change how everyone, including Judge Caprio, saw justice forever. Judge Caprio's questions still lingered in the air. Why don't you tell me how you're really doing today? No one ever asked that inside a courtroom. Not in this one, not anywhere. And yet, in that moment, something in Isabella's eyes changed, like a storm passing over still water. Her lawyer, Mr. Peton, shifted restlessly beside her. He wasn't used to these kinds of questions. His world was built on technicalities, motions, and legal loopholes, not emotions, not truth. Your Honor, he interrupted quickly, if I may clarify. But the judge raised his hand once more. Calm, gentle, firm. Counselor, I appreciate your preparation, but I'd like to hear directly from Miss Ashford. A soft murmur rippled through the gallery. Isabella took a breath, slow, deliberate. Her fingers tightened on the edge of the podium as if holding herself steady against an invisible tide. When she finally spoke, her voice was measured but trembling. I want to be honest with you, Your Honor. My father believes that problems are meant to disappear. That money, power, and titles can fix everything. And maybe for him, they can, but not for me. She stopped, her throat tightening. These parking tickets happened outside a medical building on Waterman Street. I kept parking there 3 times a week for months. Caprio tilted his head. A medical building? Her lips trembled. Yes, sir. The oncology center. A pause, just long enough for the meaning to sink in. I wasn't visiting anyone, she continued softly. I was the patient. The room fell into complete silence. You could have heard a pin drop. Even the air in that courtroom felt heavier, as if everyone had suddenly remembered what real pain looked like. Judge Caprio leaned back slightly, his voice lower now. You were receiving treatment? She nodded. Chemotherapy for stage 2 breast cancer. And just like that, all the arrogance, all the assumptions gone. The diamonds, the scarf, the lawyer, none of it mattered anymore. Because behind the designer image stood a daughter who had been fighting for her life. Caprio looked down for a moment, composing himself. Then he looked up again, and his tone changed from judicial to human. I'm so sorry to hear that, Isabella. How are you now? I finished my last treatment 3 weeks ago, she said, her voice breaking slightly. They say I'm in remission. A quiet smile flickered across her lips, but it didn't last. It's been the hardest year of my life, Your Honor. Now, most judges would have moved on. They would have nodded politely, made a note, and gone back to the paperwork. But not Caprio. He could tell there was more. He leaned forward gently. You said it's been the hardest year of your life. Tell me why. Isabella hesitated. For the first time, her eyes darted toward her lawyer, as if silently asking for permission. But then she looked back at the judge and shook her head. My father had my whole life planned, she began slowly. I was supposed to finish my master's at Brown, International Relations. He wanted me to follow his footsteps, to serve in diplomacy, to make the Montero name proud. She smiled faintly, but it was a sad smile. When I got sick, everything stopped. My studies, my plans, my future. But my father, he doesn't understand the word pause. He doesn't understand weakness. He only understands control. Her voice trembled. He didn't visit me, Your Honor. Not once. You could almost feel hearts breaking in that room. Not because of the illness, but because of the loneliness. The attorney looked down, pretending to review his notes, but even he couldn't hide the discomfort. The truth was too raw, too real. Caprio's jaw tightened, the way it does when a father hears of another father's failure. He sends money, Isabella continued. He sends assistants, doctors, lawyers, everything except himself. She looked up, her eyes glistening now. He hired Mr. Peton to handle these tickets, told him to make it go away, just like he makes everything else disappear. She took a deep breath, her voice firming. But I'm done disappearing, Your Honor. I'm done being invisible. Judge Caprio didn't move, didn't speak. He just listened. And in that silence, something beautiful happened. The courtroom, usually buzzing with whispers and coughs, felt utterly quiet. Even the people waiting for their own cases, the traffic violators, the small claims petitioners, sat still, watching, absorbing the weight of her words. This wasn't just about 3 parking tickets anymore. It was about a young woman fighting not only cancer, but the burden of being unseen. And then, in a trembling voice that carried more strength than any title ever could, Isabella said something that left everyone speechless. My mother died when I was 12, she whispered. The same cancer. The doctors said it might be genetic. And when I heard my diagnosis, all I could think was, I'm going to die the same way she did, alone. Her voice broke. Because my father couldn't bear to watch someone he loves get sick again. You could hear someone in the back quietly sniffle. Even the bailiff looked away, blinking hard. Caprio exhaled slowly. He'd seen tragedy before, but this felt different. This wasn't a legal case anymore. It was a human confession. He looked at her, really looked. Not at her scarf, her clothes, or her title, but at the young woman beneath it all. The fighter, the survivor, the daughter still longing for a father's presence. Isabella, he said softly, I want you to know something. You are not alone. The words hung in the air like a quiet prayer. For the first time, Isabella smiled. A real smile. The kind that comes not from happiness, but from being seen. But what happened next, no one in that courtroom was prepared for. Because when Isabella revealed the real reason behind her defiance, the courtroom would never be the same again. For a long moment, the courtroom stayed silent, the kind of silence that wraps around you like a heavy blanket. Isabella stood there, trembling but unbroken, her chin lifted with quiet resolve. Judge Caprio leaned forward slightly, his voice low, gentle. You said you've been fighting alone, he said softly. But tell me, Isabella, what's really been going on? Her lips parted, but no words came at first. She looked down at her hands, still trembling, and then back up at the judge with eyes that carried years of loneliness. My father wanted me to pretend, she whispered, to hide the illness, to keep smiling for photographs, to make public appearances when I could barely walk. He said our family name had a reputation, and I was ruining it. She shook her head, a sad, disbelieving smile touching her lips. He said illness makes people uncomfortable, that diplomats don't show weakness. And that's when the courtroom began to understand. The real battle wasn't against cancer, it was against shame. Judge Caprio's hand tightened slightly around his gavel, not in anger, but in sorrow. He'd heard many stories in his years on the bench, stories of poverty, injustice, heartbreak. But this was about a daughter punished for being human. He looked at her gently. Your father, the ambassador, does he know you're here today? She shook her head. No, Your Honor. He thinks my attorney is taking care of it. He said I shouldn't bother attending, that it's beneath me. A soft murmur rippled through the audience. Even the attorney shifted awkwardly, avoiding eye contact. Caprio studied her for a long moment. You came anyway, he said finally. Yes, she whispered, because I wanted to be seen, just once as me, not as an ambassador's daughter, not as a patient, just as a person who made a mistake. And then, without warning, she reached up and did something that made everyone in that courtroom stop breathing. With trembling fingers, Isabella untied the elegant Hermes scarf from around her neck. Slowly, silently, she let it fall onto the podium. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Beneath the scarf, faint scars traced across her skin, small, pale reminders of a medical port once used for chemotherapy. They weren't ugly. They were proof. Proof that this young woman had survived something most people couldn't even imagine. Judge Caprio's eyes softened, his voice barely above a whisper. "Those are your battle scars," he said quietly. "You've earned every one of them." For the first time, Isabella stood a little taller, as if those words alone had given her back her strength. But her next words broke every heart in that room. "My father told me to hide them," she said softly. "He said the world doesn't need to see pain. That we're diplomats. We smile, we wave, and we make things disappear. But I'm done disappearing, Your Honor. I'm done hiding my pain." She looked around the room, her voice trembling but strong. "These tickets, they're not about money. They're about what I became while I was sick. I parked close to that building because I could barely stand after treatment. I forgot to pay because my mind was somewhere between fear and survival. And when the summons came, my father wanted to erase it like everything else." She paused. "But I don't want it erased. I want to be accountable. I want to face it." Judge Caprio's voice was steady, but his eyes glistened. "That takes courage, Isabella. Far more than most people ever show." And for a second, he wasn't just a judge. He was a father, a witness, a man remembering all the people he'd seen who just wanted someone to say, "I see you." Behind her, the audience sat motionless. Even those waiting for traffic cases wiped tears from their cheeks. But as she stood there, fragile yet fierce, something unexpected happened. The door at the back of the courtroom creaked open. Everyone turned. It wasn't the ambassador. It was a woman, elderly, in a simple coat, holding a small bouquet of flowers. She quietly slipped into the last row, her eyes brimming with compassion. No one knew who she was, but when Isabella glanced back, her breath caught. It was the nurse who'd sat with her through every chemo session. Their eyes met for just a moment, and in that small exchange, the courtroom witnessed something powerful. Connection, gratitude, and the unspoken bond between two souls who'd shared the darkest hours of life. Judge Caprio saw it too. He leaned back, exhaling softly. He knew what he had to do, but he also knew the story wasn't finished yet. "Isabella," he said after a pause, "do you know what I see when I look at you?" She blinked, shaking her head slightly. "I see strength," he said. "The kind of strength people write books about. The kind that survives storms, even when no one's watching." Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time not from pain. From being seen, truly seen, after so long. And yet, deep down, everyone in that courtroom felt it. Something was still missing. Because the one person who needed to hear those words wasn't there. The case of Isabella Montero Ashford, the ambassador's daughter, had become something much larger than anyone expected. It wasn't about fines or laws. It was about a father who chose distance over love, and a daughter who finally chose truth over silence. And as Judge Caprio set down his pen and folded his hands, he knew the breaking point was coming. Because this young woman's truth was about to test not just the law, but the meaning of justice itself. And then the moment came. The breaking point that no one in that courtroom could have seen coming. Not even Judge Caprio himself. For a few heartbeats, no one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of the air vent above, a fragile rhythm against the stillness. Judge Caprio's hands rested on the bench, his eyes never leaving Isabella's face. The lawyer stood motionless beside her, his legal notes forgotten. The young woman took a deep breath, steadying herself. Her voice was quieter now, but it carried more power than ever. "Your Honor," she said, "I came here today, ready to hide behind my father's name. But when I walked in and you asked me how I'm doing, something in me broke. Because no one's asked me that in a long time." She paused, her eyes shimmering. "Not my friends, not my doctors, not even my father." Her next words would echo through that courtroom and through the hearts of everyone listening. "I fought cancer alone," she said, her tone steady but heavy. "Every chemo session, every test, every long night, staring at the ceiling wondering if I'd wake up the next morning, I fought them all alone. The day I lost my hair, I cried for hours, not because of vanity, but because I realized no one would be there to hold me." Her hand brushed her scarf, the one she had laid down, like a small goodbye to what it once represented. And now, she continued, her voice breaking, my father thinks he can erase everything with one phone call. But I'm not his title. I'm not his immunity. I'm his daughter, and I just wanted him to show up. For a moment, even Judge Caprio had to look away. The words cut through the courtroom like quiet thunder, soft but unstoppable. Then something happened that no one expected. From the back of the courtroom, the older nurse, the one who had quietly entered moments before, rose to her feet. Your Honor, she said softly, tears glistening in her eyes. I was with her during her treatments. I saw her come in weak, pale, terrified, and I saw her walk out every time with her head high. This young woman, she said, her voice trembling, fought harder than anyone I've ever known. The gallery stirred. You could feel the collective emotion rising like a tide, strangers connected by the same invisible thread, compassion. Judge Caprio nodded slowly, his throat tightening. He turned back to Isabella, his eyes kind but full of gravity. You've been through something no one your age should ever face, he said quietly. But I need to ask you one more thing. Why come forward now? Why not just let your attorney handle it? Isabella looked down for a moment, then lifted her gaze, clear and strong. Because I don't want to hide anymore, she said. Because I'm done pretending life is perfect. Because I'm tired of being untouchable. I want to live as a person who faces things, not one who escapes them. And then, the words that broke even the toughest hearts in that courtroom. I came here to pay for my mistakes, Your Honor, she whispered. But the truth is, I already paid more than anyone knows. She hesitated, her voice faltering. I paid in fear. I paid in silence. I paid every time I looked at an empty hospital chair where my father should have been. Her tears finally fell, quiet, unguarded, human. The kind of tears that make everyone in the room remember their own heartbreaks. Even her lawyer, once so polished and distant, bowed his head, unable to meet her gaze. Judge Caprio leaned back, his eyes glistening now. His gavel rested forgotten beside his hand. He took a deep breath. Isabella, he said softly, you've reminded us all today that justice isn't just about laws. It's about people. He paused, then added quietly, and I believe it's about mercy too. But what he said next, no one in that courtroom could have predicted. Please step forward, he said gently. She hesitated, unsure. It's okay, he assured her. Come closer. As she did, he stood, something he rarely did during a case. The entire room fell silent, unsure of what was happening. Judge Caprio looked at her, his voice full of emotion. You face pain most people can't imagine. You stood alone when others should have stood beside you. And still, you're here, asking for accountability, not escape. He nodded slowly. That's strength. That's integrity. And if your father were here, I'd tell him that his daughter taught this courtroom something about what real courage looks like. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time they carried pride. And just when everyone thought the emotion couldn't get deeper, Judge Caprio made his decision. He turned to the gallery, his voice calm but resonant. I want everyone here to remember something, he said. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment. It's about understanding. Sometimes mercy is the loudest form of justice we can give. He looked back at Isabella. And today, that mercy belongs to you. The next words, his verdict, would leave every person in that courtroom speechless. Because what Judge Caprio did next wasn't just law, it was humanity in its purest form. The courtroom was frozen, still, waiting. Every pair of eyes was fixed on Judge Caprio. Even the air seemed to hesitate, caught between the weight of justice and the grace of mercy. He took a deep breath, his hands folded gently before him. Miss Ashford, he began softly, I've listened to your story, and I want you to know it has touched me deeply. He paused, not for drama, but because his voice almost trembled. In all my years on this bench, I've learned that behind every case file, there's a person, a heartbeat, a struggle, a story. And today, you reminded all of us what that truly means. He reached for the papers on his desk, the 3 parking tickets that had brought this young woman to court. 3 slips of paper, small, insignificant in the eyes of the law, Yet behind them lay months of pain, fear, and loneliness. "I see here," he said, glancing down, "3 unpaid violations totaling $427. He looked back up. "But what I truly see," he continued, "is something far greater. I see a young woman who has endured the unthinkable. A woman who stood before this court not to demand privilege, but to claim responsibility." The audience sat utterly still. "I see someone," Caprio said softly, "who could have hidden behind her father's title, but instead stood here in truth. And that truth, Miss Ashford, is worth more than any fine, any law, any immunity." He let the words settle. Then, quietly, he lifted the papers in his hand. Everyone leaned forward, holding their breath, waiting for his judgment. "Now, as for these tickets," he said, his tone steady but kind, "I could enforce them. I could demand payment. The law would allow it." He paused. Then his eyes softened. "But I won't." A hush fell over the courtroom. Even Isabella's lawyer looked up, stunned. "I am dismissing all 3 violations," Caprio declared. "No fines, no fees, no record. Case dismissed." Gasps and soft murmurs rippled through the gallery. But before relief could fully wash over Isabella's face, Caprio raised his hand and continued. "However," he said firmly, "I'm not dismissing them because of who your father is. I am dismissing them because of who you are." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady, compassionate. "Because you've already paid a far heavier price than money could ever measure. You paid with sleepless nights, with pain, with silence, and with the strength it took to face this courtroom today. You could feel the emotion building again, not from sadness but from awe." He stood slowly, something he almost never did when delivering verdicts. The room fell utterly silent. "Miss Ashford," he said gently, "you are not just an ambassador's daughter. You are a survivor. You are a reminder to all of us that courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to face it." A faint smile broke across Isabella's face, the kind of smile that comes after a long storm finally clears. "And one more thing," Caprio continued, turning slightly toward the lawyer. "When you next speak to Ambassador Montero, please tell him something for me." The lawyer blinked, unsure. "Yes, Your Honor." "Tell him," Caprio said, his voice calm but unwavering, "that diplomatic immunity is a poor substitute for love. That the only title that truly matters is father." A single tear slipped down Isabella's cheek. She didn't wipe it away. The audience sat motionless, moved not by the law, but by the lesson, and just when you thought the moment couldn't get more powerful, Judge Caprio spoke directly to everyone watching. He turned back to the courtroom, his tones softening again. "I want everyone here, and everyone who may see this, to remember something important. Life will knock you down. It will test you in ways you can't prepare for. But when that happens, don't hide. Don't pretend. Don't disappear behind excuses or titles." He looked back at Isabella. "Face it. Even if your voice shakes, even if your hands tremble, face it. Because that's where strength begins." Isabella nodded, tears shining but steady. Caprio smiled gently. "You've already won your hardest case, young lady, the one against despair. I wish you health, happiness, and a long life surrounded by people who see you for who you truly are." He raised his gavel one last time, not as a symbol of authority, but of closure. "Case dismissed." He brought it down softly, one quiet strike that felt less like an ending and more like a blessing. And yet, as Isabella turned to leave, something unexpected happened, something that made even Judge Caprio pause. As she stepped away from the bench, Isabella stopped suddenly. She turned, tears glistening under the fluorescent light. "Your Honor," she said softly, "thank you not for dismissing my case, but for seeing me." Caprio smiled gently. "It was never hard to see you, Miss Ashford. You just had to look up." And for the first time, the young woman laughed, a small, broken, beautiful sound. The entire courtroom joined in applause, a rare moment of unity between strangers. The nurse in the back clutched her flowers tighter, whispering a quiet prayer under her breath as Isabella walked out into the morning light. Everyone felt it, that this wasn't the end of a courtroom story. It was the beginning of healing. Because what happened that day wasn't just a verdict. It was a reminder of what justice is supposed to be. The gavel's soft echo faded into stillness, like the final note of a song that no one wanted to end. Isabella Montero Ashford stood there for a moment, unable to move. Her attorney gathered his papers quietly, unsure of what to say. The gallery, usually bustling with whispers and footsteps, remained completely silent. Every person suspended in that rare, sacred quiet that only truth can create. Judge Caprio sat back in his chair, his eyes following her as she took one small, uncertain step toward the courtroom doors. For years, he had watched thousands of people walk through those doors, some angry, some relieved, some broken. But this young woman, she walked out lighter, freer, as though the weight she carried had finally been lifted. The nurse rose from the back row, meeting her near the aisle. Without a word, she handed Isabella the bouquet of flowers she had been clutching since she entered. The petals were soft pink, fragile, yet full of life. "You did it, sweetheart," the nurse whispered. "You faced it." Isabella's smile trembled, but it was real. She hugged the nurse tightly, her tears falling freely now, not out of sorrow, but release. For the first time in a long time, Isabella wasn't hiding anymore. Not behind wealth, not behind fear, not behind immunity. She was simply herself. Judge Caprio watched them for a moment, his hand resting on the bench. Then he glanced around the courtroom, at the faces of strangers who had come for speeding tickets and parking fines, but had just witnessed something far greater than law. He spoke quietly, almost to himself, but everyone could hear. "This," he said, "is what justice is supposed to look like." He looked up, his voice steady but gentle. "It isn't always about punishment. Sometimes it's about listening. Sometimes it's about giving someone a chance to be human again." The people in the gallery nodded softly, even those who had come expecting nothing but routine proceedings. They were leaving with something else entirely, something that would stay with them long after they walked out those doors. And somewhere, perhaps hundreds of miles away, a man in a tailored suit, Ambassador Eduardo Montero, would soon hear the words that would pierce his heart. Later that day, as the court transcripts made their way to his office, he would read what Judge Caprio had said. Tell him that diplomatic immunity is a poor substitute for love, that the only title that truly matters is father. And perhaps, for the first time in many years, the ambassador would sit in silence, realizing that his daughter's courage had done what his position never could. It had earned respect, not through power, but through truth. Back in Providence, the winter light spilled through the courtroom windows. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, taking off his glasses for a moment. He rubbed his eyes, not from fatigue but from emotion. He thought about all the people who had sat before him, the guilty, the frightened, the proud, the lost. And he thought about what Isabella had taught them all, that sometimes mercy is the highest form of justice, that the most powerful courtroom moments aren't the loud ones. They're the quiet confessions, the trembling voices, the tears that tell the truth without needing permission. And that's when he said something that would later become one of his most quoted lines. He looked straight at the camera, the one quietly recording at the back of the room, and said softly, "Be kind to each other. You never know what battles the person next to you is fighting." The audience, whether in the courtroom or watching from home, felt the words settle deep inside them. Outside, Isabella stepped into the sunlight, clutching the flowers close. The cold morning air brushed her face, but it didn't sting anymore. Somewhere behind her, the courtroom doors closed with a soft echo, not an ending, but a beginning. She looked up at the sky, blue, vast, full of light, and smiled. For the first time in a long time, she felt alive. In that small courtroom in Providence, justice wasn't written in laws or judgments. It was written in compassion. A young woman found her voice again, and a judge reminded the world that mercy isn't weakness, it's strength in its purest form. Because sometimes the greatest victories happen not when we win a case, but when we heal a heart. Never underestimate the power of kindness. You might just change someone's life or save your own.